From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's global headquarters in New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
Donald Trump elected the 47th president of the United States in a decisive victory over Kamala Harris, who conceded the race a short time ago.
While I concede this election, I do not concede the fight that fueled this campaign.
We'll have reaction this hour from Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens of Michigan, former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta, and our signature political panel.
Plus, with a Republican majority in the Senate guaranteed, the House still too close to call. And Sarah Chamberlain of the Republican Main Street Partnership will join us on where things stand. Thank you for being with us on Bloomberg TV and radio the day after the election, with votes still being counted, but a transition clearly underway. Kaylee, we heard now from both candidates. Donald Trump last night. Kamala Harris waited until just a short time ago addressing her supporters at Howard University.
Well, and to your point about votes still being counted, the Associated Press just made another race call. Donald Trump picking up the 3 electoral votes in Alaska, which brings his total tally at this time to 295. Arizona and Nevada have not yet been called, but he could end up with well over 300 electoral votes. This has been a decisive victory.
That's right.
And to your point, Joe, it is one that Kamala Harris recognized this afternoon.
The outcome of this election is not what we wanted, not what we fought for, not what we voted for, but hear me when I say, the light of America's promise will always burn bright. As long as we never give up and as long as we keep fighting.
Joining us from Howard University right now is Bloomberg's Skylar Woodhouse, who has followed Kamala Harris for the duration of her campaign. Skylar, it's great to have you with us this evening on Balance of Power. Of course, we were listening to and watching the vice president, but from our perch here at World Headquarters in New York, the cutaway shots of young women and men crying clearly made this a very emotional affair. What was it like to be there?
It is a very emotional day. It's very gloomy on a very sunny day here at Howard University, Vice President Kamala Harris's alma mater. It's been a historic campaign season, and Vice President Kamala Harris spoke to her supporters today, students of Howard alumni, and told them that, it is not the election that they had hoped for, but talked about how proud she was of the campaign, of all of the support that she was only able to do with only a little bit over 100 days since becoming the nominee. Now, she told her supporters that it is time to roll up their sleeves and to just accept the results. She said that with Donald Trump, she's going to ensure that there is a peaceful transfer of power. But in the midst of saying all of these things, it was still a very emotional day for supporters and all of her staffers, just everyone that has been in her corner these past couple of months. So for Vice President Kamala Harris, she was joined by her family here, and she, talked about how she is going to continue to fight to protect democracy and women's reproductive rights. But it was still a very emotional day for the campaign.
All right, Bloomberg's Skylar Woodhouse, live from Howard University in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much. Well, Harris's concession does mark the fact that this race is over. The dissection of it and the demographics that have driven this loss for Harris and victory for Donald Trump are only just starting to be analyzed as we break down the results, not just of the presidential race in some of these critical states, but the Senate races as well, like Michigan, which went for Trump, but had the Democratic candidate, Elisa Slotkin, win the Senate seat by less than a point. So let's go now to Michigan, in Detroit, where we find Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick. So, Romaine, break this down for us.
Yeah, a very slim victory for Elisa Slotkin, despite the fact that she outspent her Republican challenger, Mike Rogers, by a factor of almost 5-1. It does look like that these vote tallies will hold for right now. There are expected to be some challenges, though. Folks that I have spoken to, though, they think that this is done. Of course, that does not necessarily address some of the gloom that does exist here in the state of Michigan, particularly in the Democratic strongholds of Wayne County. The idea that this was a big opportunity missed, an opportunity for the Harris campaign to connect with the voters in a way that Trump was somehow able to do, coming into some of the Arab American and Muslim enclaves just to the west of me, going to some of the Jewish enclaves just north of me, and to some of the Polish American communities further off to the east. This idea here that Trump had a message that was, believe it or not, maybe a little bit more humanistic than what we heard out of Kamala Harris. And on that point, and this is more for Joe, because I know Joe is a student of political history, and listening to that concession speech that Harris just gave, probably one of the better concession speeches that I've heard, and really kind of harken back to 2000 when Al Gore gave that concession speech during the whole hanging Chad controversy versus George W. Bush, or even going back to the speech that Reagan gave when he lost the primary in 1976 to Gerald Ford, a concession speech that really actually launched the next phase of his political career, where he would win the presidential election in 1980, and I think all the way back to Eisenhower when he walked out of office in 1961 and really talked about that page of American history, that long road that had yet to be written, and his warning that as the world became smaller, it was important for the U.S. not to become a country of hate, but to become one of mutual respect and trust.
Romaine Bostick couldn't have said it better. On the ground in the swing state of Michigan, he's spent several days on our behalf in Detroit. And Romaine, we thank you for it. As we turn to the big prize of Pennsylvania now, where the Senate race has yet to be called. Dave McCormick is up over incumbent Democrat Bob Casey by just about a half point. This remains extremely close, so we could get a call even while we're on the air, though it could take longer. That's the way it goes in this campaign. And in Pennsylvania specifically, where we find Bloomberg's David Gura, he's on the ground in Philadelphia, having endured many days of coverage in the most important state here among the swing states. David, Kamala Harris used the adage that it's only when it's dark enough that you can see the stars, which was a version of Joe Biden's line that we used to hear in his speeches, that faith sees best in the dark. Didn't know how much we'd hear about Joe Biden, the boy from Scranton. That was supposed to be his strong suit. Pennsylvania. Did she lose in part because of him in Pennsylvania or despite him?
It's a great question, and I think that this postmortem is going to last for an awful long time as we pick apart all the counterfactuals of who she could have picked as a running mate. Could Joe Biden have dropped out earlier? What might that have meant? I mean, Romaine rightly is bringing up history and how fraught with history this moment is. I've been thinking about it as well, and just how much history has centered on this state, in particular on this Commonwealth. Of course, it was just a few months ago when there was that first assassination attempt on Donald Trump here in Pennsylvania, in Butler County. So much of this race has been confined to the four corners of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The old adage, of course, is that the presidency, the road to the presidency, comes through the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And we have seen both of these candidates pour so much money, so much time into this state, crisscrossing it over and over again, more than 100 visits by these candidates to this state, trying to get voters to come into their camps. You know, I listened to what the vice president had to say in that speech, in particular to what she said to young people who were gathered there. And she has to know, as she's saying that was a part of the electorate that she wished she had more support from when those votes were cast yesterday. So, you know, I think you mentioned that race that's still uncalled here between Dave McCormick and Bob Casey, the incumbent Democratic senator here. It's really hinging on one county in the western part of the state, a solidly red part of the state of Pennsylvania. I think that the McCormick camp is very confident that they've got this wrapped up. As you say, they could call this race any time now, but it is astonishing to think that all that's happened here in these last few months, how much of it is centered on the state where I'm standing, guys.
Well, in the state where you're standing, David, is one of 3 states that we refer to as the blue wall. Are we still going to be doing that after this?
I think that is unlikely, and we've heard from Romaine. I'll steal from him as well this notion that Michigan is no longer a blue state or a contested state. It's a red state. I think that there's going to be a lot of introspection here among Pennsylvanians about this state as well. Of course, there are parts of it, pockets of it, that are solidly blue and have been for a long time. But I keep thinking about the data from Philadelphia and the suburbs and the exurbs in particular, places where in the past Democrats have drawn such a groundswell of support. That wasn't the case. They didn't get as much as they needed or expected to in this race. And I think it does change kind of the political calculus, the terrain they've come to expect here. It does seem like things have really shifted, perhaps in a permanent way here over these last few years.
All right, Bloomberg's David Gura live in Pennsylvania. Thank you for your great work over the last few days. And we want to reflect as well on the day we have seen in financial markets in the aftermath of this victory being declared for Donald Trump. It was a ripper. And joining us now with a check on it is Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle. Abigail, dollar up, stocks up, yields up.
It's pretty amazing here. We have a risk-on day for sure. Stocks absolutely surging. The S&P 500 up more than 2.5%. The best day going all the way back to 2022. But to your point, Kaylee, it's not just stocks. And I should mention the KBW Bank Index, in part because of bonds being down, yields higher, up 10.7%. Its best day also since actually November 2020. So we're really going back there. And all of this is a vote for the relief, the certainty of knowing who the next president is going to be. But it's also, I would argue, a vote for Donald Trump himself. The idea of what his policies and his administration could mean: lower taxes, tariffs, protectionists. So we're seeing that in bond yields going higher, that dollar up the most since 2020 at the highs last night. You guys probably saw it when it was up even more, the best since 2016. Really, for that protectionism, the idea that the U.S. is first, showing there. The VIX that we've been talking about down, volatility is down. And then, Joe, earlier you were talking about some niche markets that were actually tumbling because of the election of Donald Trump, such as cannabis. But the one that really stands out to me that I was talking about before that confirms this Trump trade, China. All things China down. That NASDAQ Golden Dragon Index, China tech stocks are down. Wynn Resorts down. And Apple, this is really interesting because of Apple's reliance on China not doing so well. Apple on this big day higher actually goes down a third of a percent. Yeah, it's really pretty incredible. But all of this provides a strong idea that the Trump trade, it's very much in effect.
Almost anything international was pointing lower today as a result. Abigail, great to have you, and thank you for getting us through this entire campaign. Abigail Doolittle has been connecting the dots between Washington and Wall Street for months for us now, and it's great to have you with us here. Great to be with you in New York. Coming up, we'll have a look at how Donald Trump's victory will impact foreign policy. We go abroad with Leon Panetta, the former U.S. Secretary of Defense, next on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and Radio.
Trump's talking point to Israel has been that he wants the war, quote, wrapped up by January, by the time Trump takes office. And what he means by that is do what you have to do. He doesn't seem to care what Israel does. He said, do what you have to do, but get it done, because he doesn't want to have to handle this or deal with it on his watch. My view is that Trump is thinking, I don't care what you do, just wrap it up. Finish this so that we can focus on the bigger problem, which is Iran, which is at the root of all of these issues.
Hagar Shamali, former director for Syria and Lebanon at the National Security Council, on the global impact of Donald Trump's win, with us earlier on the early edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and Radio. Joining us now for a closer look on this late edition is Leon Panetta, the former U.S. Secretary of Defense, also, of course, former White House Chief of Staff and former director of the CIA. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. Whether it's the Middle East, Ukraine, or elsewhere, Donald Trump, during the course of this campaign, frequently suggested that the world was on the brink of World War III. Can you characterize the world geopolitically that he is inheriting?
Well, there's no question it's a dangerous world. It's got a lot of flashpoints, probably more flashpoints since what we've seen since World War II. We've got Russia and Ukraine. We've got China threatening Taiwan. We've got the Middle East exploding. We've got the problem with dealing with Iran and its threats. We have North Korea and the fact that they've developed a nuclear stockpile and don't seem hesitant to try to use it. And we're dealing with terrorism. So there are an awful lot of hotspots in the world that I don't think the new president is going to be able to hide from. Obviously, we had some concern. I have some concern that in the last administration, he talked about isolationism. He talked about America first. And the reality is that in a world that's that dangerous, you cannot just put your head in the sand. You're going to have to deal with those challenges.
Well, so I guess the question becomes, Will the world be safer or more dangerous under a Trump 2.0, Mr. Secretary? You have a unique view, and a lot of people think that he could have an impact on the situation in the Middle East, on the war in Ukraine, that Joe Biden could not get his arms around. What will these two conflicts look like a couple of months from now? Donald Trump says he can solve them on day one.
Well, he did say that during the campaign, that all of these conflicts that are out there, he could solve on day one. And, we knew that was over the top. The reality is, I guess he could solve them if he just simply allows tyrants to have their way and allows people to have their way and doesn't try to in any way provide any world leadership to guide what happens there. I think, obviously with regards to the Middle East, he's basically given Netanyahu a blank check. And he's hoping that somehow he can resolve these issues by the time he takes office. But anybody who's familiar with the Middle East knows that it's not going to go away that easily, that you're going to continue to have to deal with Hezbollah, elements of Hezbollah. You're going to have to deal with Hamas. You're going to have to deal with Iran. Those problems are not going to suddenly disappear. So I suspect the Middle East will still be around when he is sworn in as president. And I think the same thing is true for Ukraine. Ukraine is very important to all of us because Ukraine is fighting for their democracy and in some ways fighting for our democracy. And the issue then becomes, how can he resolve this issue? I'm sure he's anxious to see if he can cut some kind of deal with Putin. But ultimately, in order for that to happen, Ukraine is going to have to be able to establish an initiative, start pushing the Russians back so that they have some leverage with regards to any negotiations that take place. So Ukraine is going to have to be supported. NATO is going to have to continue to support them. And hopefully we can ultimately find some kind of resolution. But that's going to take a lot of time.
Well, sir, as we consider the future of that support, a lot of that also rides on the decision-making of Congress. How could the size of the Republican Senate majority and the outcome of the majority in the House make a difference there?
Well, having worked with Republicans on this issue, I think there are many Republicans that support Ukraine's battle because they understand that it's a message that we have to send not just to Putin, but to Xi as well when it comes to Taiwan. You can't, you cannot be tough on China and somehow not tough on Russia at the same time. And so I suspect that that Senate, Republicans in the Senate, Democrats in the Senate will continue to say that you can't simply pull the rug out from Zelensky in Ukraine. You're going to have to continue to try to help him, to provide some support to him, and at the same time, hope that Ukraine can establish some initiative so that you can ultimately negotiate some kind of resolution. And that's where hopefully Trump's relationship with Putin can perhaps be helpful in trying to find some resolution.
Mr. Secretary, we watched you deliver a speech at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago less than an hour before Kamala Harris accepted her party's nomination. You've been a vocal supporter. You've also been in politics a long time. I wonder how you're rationalizing this loss and how long you think the Democratic Party will be in the political wilderness.
Well, having been through a number of elections in my over 50 years of public life, this isn't my first rodeo. So I understand how things can change and how one party can gain momentum. And they certainly did in the election this year. And it's a wake-up call. It's clearly a wake-up call for Democrats that they have to be willing to reach out and reconnect to working people in this country. They've got to reconnect with business. They've got to reconnect with minorities. They're going to have to reconnect with a number of constituencies out there that felt like they were being ignored. And it's going to be important, especially rural America, which went almost totally for Trump. All of these areas, we have to be able, as Democrats, to be able to speak to those that are feeling deeply that what's happening in Washington is not working for them.
Understood.
That's a reality. And that's something, frankly, that Democrats should have spoken to in this last election.
A voice of experience, Leon Panetta, the former U.S. Secretary of Defense. Always a pleasure to have you with us on Bloomberg. We thank you. Much more ahead here on Balance of Power as we continue live from World Headquarters in New York. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio.
Michigan is a big, diverse, beautiful place that has given so much opportunity to so many people, and that is something that we should all be deeply proud of. If you can do big things in Michigan, you can do big things in the whole country because we are a microcosm of the country here. We are home to Democrats, Republicans, and independents, and everything in between, and that's not going to change anytime soon. We are on this boat together.
Democratic Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan just won Michigan's Senate seat, now officially called by the Associated Press, urging unity within the state during a speech that we witnessed last night. Joining us now fresh from her own re-election win is Slotkin's colleague, Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens of Michigan. Congresswoman, thanks for being back on Bloomberg. Good to see you on Balance of Power, and congratulations on your win. How come that support for Democrats did not bubble to the top of the ticket in your critical swing state?
Well, look, I'm not here to armchair quarterback, just as the data is fresh on the printing presses. Look, there were a lot of things, and Kamala Harris reminded us of this every time she came to Michigan, that we're the underdogs. There were a lot of things that were in some ways inherently stacked against us. A late arrival to the ticket, a new ticket, some of the confusion surrounding that. And one thing with Alyssa Slotkin that she knows how to do, and she told me this morning at nearly 3 a.m., just because I had the chance to talk to her and we're so close, that she had a really small margin of victory, but it was going to be a margin of victory. And she almost got it to the number before all the votes were in, but they were talking to clerks and getting the tally in. And so these are just close elections, and there's a lot to dissect on. I'm here in Oakland County. I don't want to be the highest vote getter necessarily in my congressional district, but I was, and in part, we got to look at that. What went wrong? We're going to be talking about that, but we also got to look to the future too. I mean, in many respects, this election just seems like a big wave in a lot of respects, and we've got to look forward and not be sitting around talking about 2016, 2020, 2024. I mean, we've been a governing party. We've done a lot of great things. Mike Johnson saying he wants to repeal the CHIPS Act, which is creating jobs in Michigan, manufacturing jobs, allowing us to compete with China, Trump's tariff-only policies, and I gotta talk to his administration about this at some point. They're not gonna work. Tariff-only policies will not work for my small businesses and my manufacturers. And I remember having these conversations with the administration in 2019 and 2020. So we got to find consensus. People are sick of the personality wars. They're obviously tired about the high cost of food and groceries. And sometimes after 6 years, Democrats took the House, held the House, lost the House. Biden is in, they just make a little switch. And we'll obviously still see what will happen with the House of Representatives, too.
Well, as we consider switches here, Congresswoman, we've been talking all cycle about the blue wall states that lit up on my electoral map right now are bright red, all three of them. So for those questioning whether Michigan is still a brick in the blue wall after this election, what would you say?
It's a big loss for us here. And I was with our governor, and the enthusiasm was up. There's a lot of organized Democrats. There's amazing grassroots things that happen at the local level. And it's a reminder as we'll head into other statewide elections in 2 years from now, House seats that I still want to win here in Michigan, that we're going to have work to do. And we've got to recognize that. We also had very high turnout in Michigan. That was unique for us compared to other blue wall states, frankly, other states around the country. Our Secretary of State reported that we had our highest voter turnout in history in 2024. And Trump won Michigan. So we got to reckon with that. I'm really proud of the people who worked in Michigan on the campaigns, these campaign staffers. I mean, they just take on such unique positions, and I don't think there was any fault of theirs. I think Kamala Harris rose to the occasion. Joe Biden conceded or suspended his campaign.
What would have happened if she picked your governor, Gretchen Whitmer? What would have been the outcome in Michigan? You ever think about that?
Our governor was playing a big role in her race, and is looking at some of these dynamics. Our governor played a big role, rather, and look, she remains very popular. And a lot of times, what people don't understand, you got people who you vote for Congress, people you vote for governor, and it feels different for the presidency. I mean, we are a federalist system, and you see that. I mean, there were people who voted for Whitmer in Michigan and just 2 years ago, and I know they voted for Trump this last time. And we're going to sit here and agonize and write long-form journalism pieces and all this and that. It's like, I got to get back to Washington next week and get back to work for people. I mean, we got a budget to pass. We've got Iran to deal with. I'm certainly still going to work on my critical supply chain, critical mineral bills that we'd like to get done before the end of the term, at least introduce something along those lines. And we just gotta keep moving forward. I can't look. I lived through the 2010 election cycle. I was in Wisconsin. And I was younger then, and I just remember feeling like, holy smokes, you know, Obama called it the Great Shellacking. I mean, Ted Strickland lost Wisconsin, and it was a bummer. And we lost governorships, we lost the House, and on and on. That's not what this is per se, but something that we just have to own up to that, frankly, Donald Trump didn't do 4 years ago is peaceful transfer of power. You see President Biden already invited him to the White House. I expect President Biden to be at his inauguration, at Donald Trump's inauguration. You know, there is that graciousness. There are these personality factors. We spent a lot of time talking about personality. And look, people know who this guy is. I'm going to have to deal with him as a member of Congress and him as president. And together we've got to somehow figure it out for this country. And we lived through a nightmare scenario with COVID hitting our country. Yeah. We obviously had the vaccine. We're really proud to produce that here in Michigan. I know manufacturing brings people together. I'm going to continue to serve my constituents, stand up for their freedoms, their values, and I'm going to continue to help people because that's what my job's all about.
All right, Congresswoman, we will leave it on that note. Thank you so much for joining us. Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens of Michigan, we appreciate your time, as always. Now, as she talks about her work in the House of Representatives, control of that chamber of Congress is still unknown at this hour. But here is Speaker Mike Johnson last night on whether he believes Republicans will retain their majority.
And I think we will, and not to put the cart before the horse, but we're going to be prepared to lead because we are facing the greatest collection of challenges that our country has faced probably since World War II, if not the Civil War. We got some awesome people joining the conference. We got new members coming in, and I think we're going to have many more.
So joining us now with a closer look at the makeup of Congress is Sarah Chamberlain, President and CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership. Sarah, you, of course, are our House Republican whisperer. We've had a lot of conversations about the odds of retaining a majority for the Republican Party in that chamber. How are you feeling at 5:30 p.m. on this day after?
Other than exhausted, because I was up all night, great. I think that we'll keep control of the House. Probably 3 to 5 seats, so it's going to be extremely close. But we're feeling very confident as I sit here today.
Sarah, you have a better sense of what frontline Republicans were thinking, what their communities and electorates were saying going into this campaign than probably anyone we're going to talk to on the program here today. I would just love your 30,000-foot view on how a perceived Democratic advantage in the White House and at least in the House of Representatives when it comes to Capitol Hill turned overnight into what appears to be a bit of a red wave. This was not a close election. Why did Republicans do so well?
Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, in all due respect to the vice president, she ran a good campaign, but she had two crucial errors. And one of them was when she was on The View, and she could not think of one way she separated herself from President Biden. And President Biden, we all know, is in the 40s approval rating. Very nice man, but the country was kind of tired of him and wanted to move him out, and she couldn't do anything there. And then there was an ad run against her. The Trump campaign ran with her own words saying that she thinks tax dollars should go to pay for sex changes for prisoners. That did not go well. I know the Trump campaign ran that over 30,000 times, and she did not respond to that. So those are two really turning points. And then to be honest, because of those turning points, Trump gained a lot of momentum, and he pulled a lot of members through with him. So in Republican Main Street Partnership, we actually looking to add 21 new members. So we'll be well over 100 members come January.
Well, then it becomes a question of the will of the members. If Donald Trump is going to have a Republican House and Senate, it becomes a question of cooperation. When he has outlined a very ambitious agenda when it comes to cutting taxes, for example, Sarah, things that bipartisan, nonpartisan institutions say could add trillions of dollars to the deficit. We know many in the Republican Party want to exercise more fiscal discipline. And I just wonder, even if we do get the red sweep, if you think everything is going to be green lit, or there may still be difficulty getting this through the House and Senate.
I think you're still going to have to compromise. I mean, as I said, I think we will have the House and the Senate. But, you know, we're going to have it with members that still live in very swing purple districts. So you're going to have to compromise with them. I think the president will put his agenda out there. We will have some discussions. We'll compromise, and then hopefully we'll get some good legislation passed for the country. I do think there will be a continuation of the tax cuts, maybe not as deep as people would like, but I think that you'll see that because a lot of Republicans do feel that it will help the economy. I know there's a potential deficit increase, but they think it will help move the country forward and hopefully deal with some of the inflation. I know inflation's come down, but it needs to come down a little bit more to help the American people out there.
I'd love to ask you about the looming leadership battles on Capitol Hill, and we can start with the leader of the House, in this case, Speaker Johnson, who we heard from coming in here. He was on stage, by the way, with Donald Trump last night. He made his way from Louisiana to West Palm Beach in time for the rally. Does he remain Speaker if the Republicans hold control of the House? There'll be no continued contest here, the likes we've seen over the last year?
I don't know that answer. I don't get a vote in that one. I think that will be discussion. I don't see why he does not at this point. People like him. He's done a good job. But I know he wanted to hold elections next week. I don't think that's going to be possible because I still think there's some seats in California that will not be called yet. So I think that the majority will not be cemented in to be able to have elections next week.
Well, it's a good reminder that we do still have a ways to go here, even if we know who the 47th president will be. And we know, of course, that Republicans will retain, for sure, the majority in the Senate. So their leadership is also in question. We heard from the outgoing Republican leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, on that earlier today, talking specifically about the successful Senate campaigns run this cycle and giving a shout out to Steve Daines.
I want to give particular credit to Steve Daines. I had that job at the NRSC a few years back. I've never seen a better performance. He focused on getting quality candidates, making sure they actually got the nomination.
Sarah, we've all been expecting that the next Republican Senate leader would be one of the Johns. Do you think Steve Daines could be a dark horse candidate that emerges now that Donald Trump is going to be the president?
I think he certainly could. I'm not sure he wants it, though. With any luck, maybe he'll stay at the senatorial committee because I agree with Senator Mitch McConnell. Steve Daines, who I know well, he does a lot of Main Street briefings for us, is wonderful. Candidates do matter, and he executed, and we definitely will have control. I think that we're even going to win in Pennsylvania as well. So maybe, but I really think he'll not throw his hat in. I think probably John Thune will have the best chance of becoming the Senate. But again, I don't get to play in those because I don't have a pin, so I get to just watch.
Yeah, but you know where their hearts lie. We want a full read-through on this once all the votes are counted and we know where the House is.
Okay.
With your help, Sarah. It sounds like the townhouse is going to get more crowded. Sarah Chamberlain, President and CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership. Thank you, as always. Coming up, we'll take a look at how President-elect Trump came out victorious last night with our signature panel. They were with us through the evening, and they're up next. Rick Davis and Jeannie Sheehan Zaino on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I believe the greatest political movement of all time. There's never been anything like this in this country, and maybe beyond. And now it's going to reach a new level of importance because we're going to help our country heal.
I spoke with President-elect Trump and congratulated him on his victory. I also told him that we will help him and his team with their transition, and that we will engage in a peaceful transfer of power.
Donald Trump in his victory speech last night, Kamala Harris delivering her concession speech a short time ago. Just about an hour ago, we heard from the vice president. Joining us now, our signature panel. They're still in New York. Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, political science professor at Iona University and senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Day after, good to see you both still with us here. Jeannie, that's going to be the mantra now from Democrats, peaceful transfer of power. Let's show them how this is supposed to go. Joe Biden meets Donald Trump on the North Portico to bring him into the House. We're going to go through all of this, right?
We're going to go through all of that, rightly so. But what Democrats really have to do is they have to regroup and spend some time reflecting on what went wrong, because a lot went wrong with this campaign. I mean, I was just sitting there thinking today, with the billions of dollars spent, the amount of door knocks, everything we've been taught and know about campaign management, you know, what Rick talks about all the time, none of it mattered. And, you know, Kamala Harris, for what she had and did wrong, she pretty much did everything right and by the book. And yet Democrats have lost their ability to speak to the working class of this country. Donald Trump is doing it. They have lost focus in terms of being able to say, this is what we can do to assist you with where you're suffering. And until they think about that and figure out how to do that and who does that well, they're going to keep being in this position.
Wow. Jeannie, you sound an awful lot like Bernie Sanders, who was essentially out with a statement saying that the Democratic Party turned its back on the working class, and the working class has done so in return. As Jeannie suggests, though, that Kamala Harris didn't make a lot of mistakes, someone who might disagree with that characterization is Frank Luntz of FIL Inc. We spoke with him on the earlier edition of Balance of Power today, and this is what he had to say about when things turned for Harris's campaign.
Vice President Harris had one of the sharpest, fastest rises of any candidate in modern history. She was hopeful and optimistic and talked about all the things that she wanted to get done. But then after the convention, she turned dark. She turned negative. It sounded as much like a Trump campaign as it did a Harris campaign. And that was when she hit her ceiling.
So whether it was going dark on democracy, Rick, or what we just heard from Sarah Chamberlain, not being able to distinguish herself from Joe Biden enough by saying there wasn't a single thing she could think of to do differently. How do you diagnose this? And considering it's not going to change the outcome, what does it mean for the balance of power moving forward as we consider Republicans versus Democrats?
Yeah, this is the trap of political campaigns. When you win, you're a genius. When you lose, you're an idiot. And so everyone's second guessing the Democrats. Look, I look at it much more holistically. They had a very bad economy. We've talked about this economy literally every day for 2 years. The administration never addressed it in a way that was productive to communicating with voters. They were never going to overcome the incredible steep climb that they were going to have to make to convince voters that somehow they'd gotten the economy back on track. And frankly, they never really tried. So all these things are right? Jeannie's right about, you know, the ground game not really amounting to much, although without it, who knows how badly she could have done, right? But the bottom line on it is the cycle was against them. She was running as an incumbent. She didn't distance herself. And it would have been very hard under even the most perfect campaign. She could have been the best candidate and the best campaign, and she wasn't going to change the public mood about how much they thought that the country was on the wrong track, and they blamed the handling of the economy on the Biden administration, and she got the lion's share of that blame herself. So when you have that kind of a campaign to run against, everything you do is going to look like it worked great. Because from the start, the table was set for a loss with Democrats.
That's remarkable, considering, to Frank Luntz's point, the remarkable rise that she showed in the polls after replacing Joe Biden at the top of the ticket. People ask if timing was the issue. What if Joe Biden had dropped out a year earlier?
You know, I think it probably would have been helpful, if only because Democrats could have had a primary. Right. You know, primaries do a lot of things. One thing they do for candidates is they get to test messages. Sure. They get to get better on the stump.
It also legitimizes them.
It legitimizes them. They get to spend time talking to voters. So there's a whole bunch of things that it would have helped. So, yeah, I think Joe Biden, I think this is going to follow him in terms of his legacy. He did not get out soon enough. But I go back to the fact when you have an economy that only less than 1 out of 10 Americans feels positive about, according to these exit polls, then it is really, really tough to overcome that unless you have an economic-focused message. And her democracy message, while I'm a political scientist, I love a good democracy message. You know the old saying, you can't eat democracy. When people are hungry and they're upset about the way that their pocketbook is, talking to them about, do you want a form of government that's better, is not particularly helpful.
Well, if it was all about the economy, there was no shortage of economic ideas put forward by Donald Trump. We got a lot of policy proposals on the campaign trail. That was the campaign trail. Governing is different. Rick, what is most likely to actually come to fruition when he takes office in January?
Yeah, it's a good question, because there was a proliferation almost daily. You know, a new tax cut every morning you woke up. If you brush your teeth once a day, you're going to get a tax cut. The reality the reality is that well, you can get more if you do it multiple times. But the bottom line is, I think most people were motivated, at least what the polling showed, by the economy they felt he had in his previous administration, right? I had money in my pocket. We heard that over and over in the focus groups and the polling. And not so much on his new policies, right? It was even hard to test because they were coming so rapidly, and did people really understand the intricate relationship between the idea of doing, a trade war and tax cuts at the same time? So I think a lot of that is yet to be unraveled. He's putting his economic team together. They're going to have a lot of internal discussions on what to do first. I have absolutely no doubt that Donald Trump will try to do everything he has talked about doing on this election, right? He has a history of doing what he says he's going to do. So you can be trusted that he's going to take a shot at it. Now, how much he invests in it is a big question, right? If he runs into an issue on certain tax cuts in Congress, I don't think he's going to break a sweat because he's got a treasure chest full of things to try. But I would say if his promise has been, and it has been, to initiate trade barriers to our trading partners on day one, I think he has the ability as president to do that, and I think you can anticipate that happening within the first week of his new administration. Wow.
All right, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, stick with us as we look at the balance of the House and Senate next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We will have the House and the Senate. But, we're going to have it with members that still live in very swing purple districts. So you're going to have to compromise with them. I think the president will put his agenda out there. We will have some discussions. We'll compromise, and then hopefully we'll get some good legislation passed for the country. I do think there will be a continuation of the tax cuts, maybe not as deep as people would like, but I think that you'll see that because a lot of Republicans do feel that it will help the economy.
Sarah Chamberlain of the Republican Main Street Partnership moments ago with her prediction on how the House will operate should Republicans keep control. While we're still awaiting key House races to be called, Republicans have officially secured the Senate majority, and the current leader in the Republican Senate, Mitch McConnell, talked about that earlier today.
With regard to the Senate, you guys know how long I've been around. I had really hoped I'd be able to hand over to my successor the majority. I've been the majority leader, I've been the minority leader. The majority is a lot better.
Back with us for final thoughts now, our signature panel, Rick Davis and Jeannie Sheehan Zaino. We only have about 2 minutes here, guys, but obviously we don't know the size of the majority in the Senate. The House is still too close to call. Based on the results we have seen thus far, though, Rick, would you bet on a red sweep?
Yeah, I think I would. I mean, I've been looking at the House races all day. I mean, you've got 20 races that could go either way right now. And so Republicans, I think, are at about 208 confirmed. They need 10 for the majority, and I think it could get more than that. So, yeah, I think that you're going to have a red sweep in Washington.
It's easier to be an insurgent than a leader. What would that mean for Hakeem Jeffries?
You know, I think that last night I was saying I think the Democrats will hold this out, but now I think they just have to get too much to go. So I think he's going to find himself once again in the minority. But even if he finds himself in the majority, it is so narrow that I think we're going to see a continuation of what we saw in the last Congress, which is a real difficulty, whichever side is there, to pass bills and then, of course, to make them and present them to the Senate. So I think it's going to be a challenge for either side.
Keeps his job, though, in the minority.
I do think he keeps his job. Yeah, I think Hakeem Jeffries has proven himself. I think this is no reflection on Hakeem Jeffries any more than it is any other party leader here.
And you see Mike Johnson keeping his role as well?
Absolutely. I think he's done what he needed to do to secure a relationship with Donald Trump that maybe been a little iffy prior to this election. And the fact that if he does come out with a majority, he'll have been given some credit for the hard work to get that done. A lot of fundraising involved. But I would caution everybody, Washington is on a 2-year cycle, not a 4-year cycle. That's just the guy at the executive mansion over on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Midterms are cruel to parties in power. And so if you think you got a majority that's going to last longer than 2 years, you better think twice.
We're not even all the way through 2024, and Rick Davis has already got us racing toward 2026.
Absolutely. We'll have the longest campaign in history once again, right? That's the way they all are. Just think, we'll meet back here in just about 2 years with Rick Davis and Jeannie Sheehan Zaino. Our signature panel. Great to see you both, and thank you for everything over the last 24 hours and the cycle of this campaign. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter if you want to follow the stories that we've been talking about here this day after. You find it on the terminal and online.
And of course, you can find us back here tomorrow as we do still have some big races to be called. The Senate race in Pennsylvania, as well as Nevada and Arizona, too close to call, and many results still to come in the House of Representatives. So stick with us for the latest coverage here on Bloomberg TV and radio.